Tonight on Insight, what should we expect from our relationships with in-laws? What are the main tensions that come with living with your wife's parents?
I'd say it's about raising our kids primarily.
As an in-law, we're giving them the freedom to walk their own journey as parents.
Historically, mother-in-laws have a role of policing the daughter-in-laws.
A son's a son until he meets a wife, and a daughter's a daughter for the rest of her life.
My mum always says everyone wants the wedding and no one wants the marriage.
Sarah and I moved up to the Byron Shire in 2014. Now Sarah's entire nuclear family are all in the same shire. We've all bought within a short walk from each other, so we only live 2 doors down from my in-laws. We get on beautifully. We have 4 kids, so Rob and Jill have got 4 grandkids coming up and back quite regularly. Yeah, we love it.
Sometimes you'll come up for a de-stress beer and I've never said no.
It's quite fun because if I ever need to chill out, like my brothers and sister being annoying, I can just come up here.
Oh, good day.
As an in-law, I love it. I almost have an emotional detachment to the inner workings of the Martins because I'm a Pierce, so I don't have that childhood history. So I can't speak for Sarah, but for me, it works beautifully.
I'm very grateful that I've got a husband that gets along and is happy to build relationships with my family, not just my parents, but obviously all the extended family too. My parents are very welcoming to anyone that their children love, they automatically love, which I think is a really special thing. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
You're all a very important part of my life, and I want to say thanks for coming to celebrate. And thank you for what each one of you children bring to our family. These are things for Darby and our beautiful son-in-law, Marcus.
You bring swift solving of puzzles, a big brother view, a love of ice cream.
You bring creativity, adventure.
Yeah, read it out loud, Robbie.
Handsome.
The in-laws are different, but because our children chose them, then we've embraced them as part of their family.
I love you, absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here. Marcus, do you think that living so close to your in-laws and loving it is unusual?
It's Captain Obvious for me. It makes so much sense when you've got 4 young children, currently aged 2 to 12, and Rob and Jill love being around them. They're great parents, they're great grandparents. I think any parent that gets on well with their in-laws, but any parent whose kids love their grandparents, yeah, I think my lucky stars every single day.
Jill, you're Marcus's mother-in-law. Was living this close to your kids and their partners part of a master plan?
When we were very early married, we said we'd always retire in the area that we've ended up, but we didn't have this step-by-step grand plan. Our middle son bought a block of land in this particular area, so we looked at the block of land, built our house, and before that had happened, Marcus and Sarah had bought a block of land only 2 doors down. We didn't want to live in our children's pockets because they'd chosen their partners, our in-laws. When they revealed to us they wanted to be close to us as grandparents, it was really thrilling.
And prior to that, had you been missing out on big family events?
Oh, we spent a lot of time in the aeroplane, up for birthdays, for footy finals, for dance concerts, for special celebrations in the family. We made a real effort to be part of the grandchildren's life, especially because we didn't have that in our childhood. Thought that was invaluable.
Marcus, did you grow up in a similar close-knit family?
Not really, Kumi, no. My mum and dad split up when I was 10, and I do think I'm attracted to that romantic notion of the nuclear family, almost the Brady Bunch, which we all kind of make fun of. But I do love the fact that Sarah's mum and dad, have been married for over 50 years. They've gone through the ups and downs of life. My mum always says everyone wants the wedding and no one wants the marriage. And I think Rob and Jill are this example of no matter what, through thick and thin, they are still here and in love and supportive and everything. So very different to my upbringing, but I think that's why I'm so attracted to spending so much time with them.
And what are the benefits of living so close to in-laws?
I still say we've got $250,000 in equity just in babysitting that we saved. But I do think it's the ease and the variety of our lifestyle that we can have. As you saw in the package earlier, that was Jill's birthday. Everyone can come together so easily. You're not doing FaceTimes. Jill and Rob know if we're struggling and we need a hand, or they also know if let's just have a little break because the kids are coming up, too often. We have to set boundaries around that. So there are so many benefits, but I think it's probably the emotional security you get from having family so close, when you get on well with them, of course.
And in terms of those boundaries, have you got specific rules?
Yeah, the kids can't go up before 9 a.m. in the morning, and when they come home from school, because there were times when they were going early, and when they come home from school, they've got to chill at home till at least 4:30 because they're rampant to go up. We do have to set significant rules to make sure that Rob and Jill can still have a life.
And Jill, how do you approach the role of mother-in-law?
Different to a mother. I remember when all three of our children rang and said, I found somebody, they're my soulmate, and both Rob and I cried because we'd nurtured our children for so many years, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and all of a sudden they had found someone to do that for them instead. And so my approach to mother-in-lawing was to give my child to their soulmate or their partner and to say, it's your job now to support them emotionally and spiritually. So I gave them as a gift. We're still part of their life, but we don't want to run it. We don't want to be advising or judging unless we're asked. So it's a very different role, very special, and it's a fine line a lot of the time.
Caroline, does Jill's attitude sound like your own mother-in-law's approach to the role?
No, Kumi, I had a very different experience. I've never actually seen this beautiful, healthy relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, so I probably stepped into my relationship wanting it to be different to my mum's, when in fact it was exactly the same.
You were married for 20 years. What was your relationship with your in-laws like at first?
Well, I think it started off really on an uneven keel in that I was from a very working class family background where they were middle to upper class. Initially, I didn't feel like I was good enough for them, so I was always trying to please and just to get accepted and noticed and validated. But to begin with, it was better, but we were distant, as in we lived overseas from each other. So when we did see each other, it was very concentrated, as in 4 to 6 weeks at a time, and then there'd be nothing for a year.
Did you expect to have a good relationship with your in-laws?
I don't necessarily say I would expect, I hoped. I mean, to begin with, she would say things like, I've always wanted a daughter, and you're my daughter.
Was there a point when your relationship with your mother-in-law started to sour?
Yeah, I would say probably over the last 10 years before we broke up. So at that point, I didn't feel like I was fully accepted in the relationship, and I also couldn't trust my husband to fully support me when things weren't going right in the dynamic, to really have my back. He stood down when I wanted him to stand up.
There was an incident when you visited your in-laws in the UK. What happened then?
There was this box on the table in the bedroom that said for my husband to sort out. So, of course, I had a little peek inside just to see what was there. And there was like all these sort of love letters and all this memorabilia from girls that had written to him. And I thought, that's a strange thing to just plonk on the table in the bedroom where I'm staying. And I said to him, I think this is really strange that your mum's put this, like, why after 30 years has this just appeared? And he said, well, I don't think that's strange. And I said, would you mind taking it out? Because I feel really uncomfortable that this is sitting here. We've been married for 16 years. And he left it in the bedroom the whole time and didn't move it.
Why do you think your husband didn't sort of want to challenge his mother at that stage?
There was a deeper level of protection that I really tried to fully understand. There had been a loss in the family, and I think there was a conversation that came up around that, and he said, Mum's had enough hurt in her life. that I don't want to bring any more hurt upon her.
At around the same time, your mother-in-law also reminded you about a card that you had written her. What was in that?
So this card appeared on my bedside table that I'd written sort of 12, 13 years prior. I didn't even recognise the writing as mine, because obviously the relationship had soured over that decade. And this beautiful card from me to her saying, what a wonderful mother-in-law you are. I'm so grateful for you. And I felt like it was a reminder that that's what we used to have together. Suddenly this card, she'd found this card and placed it next to my bedside table as a reminder of the relationship that once was.
When things like the letters happened, did that affect your marriage?
Absolutely, because I was asking him to remove it because I felt comfortable, plus the children, it was on display. And I was questioning why wouldn't he want to take it away and say to his mother, I don't need this anymore, this is well in my past, and Caroline feels uncomfortable. So I was then questioning, it's not necessarily fully about her now, but it's about our dynamic. Why is he choosing not to support and protect me when I feel uncomfortable in this situation?
Why do you think there was that mother-son dynamic?
Perhaps I was seen as the threat that you took him away from me.
In hindsight, is there anything you did that might have contributed to that dynamic between you and your mother-in-law?
I think it was more of what I didn't do. I didn't feel good enough from the start. So I looked to my husband at the time, can you have my back? And he chose to step back too. So I felt very alone, very an outcast in the relationship.
Rena, you married Andrew last December. Before you met your in-laws, did you have any worries about them accepting you?
Yes, there could be some questions around. We both were from different cultures. I was older than Andrew and I had a child from previous relationship. But I think our love was so strong and powerful that I felt okay meeting them.
What was it like when you first met Andrew's parents?
It was amazing. It was fantastic to meet them very first time. The way they reciprocated was very kind and with unconditional love. They welcomed me, they called me over for Christmas lunch very first time. And it took me some time to introduce my daughter to them. Though Andrew is their son and they love him, but they also welcome me and my daughter in the family with their open hearts and so much love.
How did that welcome compare to your experiences with your in-laws from your first marriage?
As compared to my previous relationship, previous marriage, my daughter was not welcomed as the first girl child into the family. So basically, I had to walk away because my child was not welcomed.
How soon after having your daughter did that marriage in India end?
Basically, 10 days after the birth of my daughter, marriage had collapsed.
Where did this end of your marriage leave you?
The end of first marriage, basically, I would say I came more stronger, and I would consider myself as a classic example of women empowerment because I was a better version of myself and I got to know my strengths, which were so hidden in those early years, and I became a better version of myself.
You applied to move to Australia when your daughter was 2 years old. Why did you do that?
I was looking for more opportunities, I was looking for a better lifestyle, and I was looking for better opportunities for my daughter as well.
Jake, you and your partner Luciano have been married for 4 years, you've been together for 8. Before you met your in-laws, were you concerned about being accepted into his family?
I think everybody's always worried about that when you're marrying someone, but I also feel in a same-sex relationship, I think all of the kind of weight of in-laws didn't really hit the same way because we never really thought of being married as kids. It wasn't something that was kind of available to us. So I feel like I had no expectations and I went in somewhat blind, I think.
Your partner Luciano is from Italy. Did you have any of that kind of cliched, oh, Italian mother-in-law thoughts about it?
Of course. I was looking forward to the food. But I did have some worries with that, but I do feel like I knew Luciano and I kind of knew what to expect. I knew that they'd raised someone who was loving and someone who was open. So you always like to assume that the person you're in love with is going to be reflected in their parents. So I had high hopes, and they were met.
Luciano, is there any truth to this sort of Italian mama's boy stereotype?
They're all true. And I'm an only child as well, which doesn't help. Yes.
So what is that stereotype?
And I think it's, it's having a very tight relationship within the family, and the relationship especially with a boy and his mum. It's a strong bond. If someone comes into the family, there's a little bit of adjustment, and that adjustment can be smooth or not.
Okay. Jake, what was it like when you first met your in-laws?
I was nervous, but there's a moment that stands out to me, and it was we were standing in her kitchen with Luciano's mum, Anna, and she was cooking. And as she was cooking, she was singing pop songs. And I had this moment of being like, that's exactly what I do. And I was like, he married his mother. It happened, and it was just this beautiful moment of I started singing with her, and in that moment we just connected in a way of understanding that, she had given him so much joy, and I was there to kind of take that over, and kind of it was now my responsibility to bring him joy, which I like to think I do.
And how about meeting your father-in-law?
I think I speak for a lot of gay men. That's always a little bit scarier, because you always feel like in my life, a lot of the homophobia I'd experienced had come from men. And so I was kind of like, gosh, am I going to be met with this kind of stern Italian man? But similar to Luciano, the minute we met, he was just so warm, and he kind of has a feeling of almost like the town mayor, because when he speaks to you, he's got so much presence, and he's so warm and so engaging, and I felt instantly like, I was now his son. And that was just how it was from the very beginning. There wasn't even a cooling off period. They were in straight away.
Is there a language barrier between you and your in-laws?
There was, but I speak Italian quite well now, and we spend hours talking around the table about everything in Italian, so I can speak pretty well.
Was there a specific moment you knew you'd been fully accepted into Luciano's family?
Yeah, there was. It was quite recently, actually. We had gone back to Italy for Christmas, the first time in 2.5 years. Emotions were super high. And while I was away, my grandma passed away in New Zealand, which was obviously a really difficult thing. I was so far away from home. And of course, I was crying on the phone, and I looked up, and my mother-in-law was standing there, and she just offered me a hug. And as she embraced me, I felt for the first time, this feels like a hug from my mother. This is my mother, and I feel so lucky that I get 2 mothers and 2 fathers now. And that moment really stands out. And then she made me carbonara for lunch, which is my favourite pasta. So
Luciano, you're an only child. How did your parents feel when you and Jake moved to the other side of the world?
They've always been supportive of my career and understanding that what I was looking to achieve, it wasn't really there in Italy. And now they realize that 2 of us are a family, so they probably are less worried because I can, find the support in him, and I feel like since we got married and we got together, my life in this regard became easier.
Jake's family's from New Zealand. What was it like to meet them?
They were lovely. They're warm. I remember we met. I think it was my birthday several years ago, and I remember the hug of my mum-in-law, and that hug, she said everything with that, and then we took off, and so it was a beautiful, warm experience.
The mother-son dynamic we heard about from Caroline, how does that play out for partners in a same-sex relationship?
I would say, from my experience, it's easier. I always think that my mum could have been more welcoming of Jake because he's a man. So I think there's less competition, or there might be less competition, and I think that it's definitely easier in our experience. In my experience, it's easier than a straight relationship.
Candice, you're an evolutionary psychologist. Is the tricky mother-in-law relationship just a stereotype, or is there a reason that that relationship can be tense?
So it does tend to be the case that there is cross-culturally agreement that the mother-in-law and particularly the daughter-in-law dynamic is one fraught with emotional tension and mutual distrust. Now, there are a few reasons for this. One of the big ones is that historically mother-in-laws have a role of policing the daughter-in-laws. It's their job to make sure that the daughter-in-laws act consistent with the family's values, that they don't bring shame to the family, and also, quite importantly, that any children that come from the union are biologically related to the son. Some mother-in-laws take that job very seriously, and the health and well-being of the daughter-in-laws can become in jeopardy.
Can that threat be explained from a sort of evolutionary perspective?
Sure. So many mother-in-laws alive today have descended from cultures where they were unable to support themselves financially. They may have been unallowed to work. They might not have had rights to inherit wealth. They may have been in a scenario where if they were able to get divorced, they would lose all access to their children from that moment onwards. And in these kinds of environments, it's very important to maintain a close relationship with your son. Your son is the person who, when your husband dies, will look after you in your old age, and it's up to him whether you're neglected or whether you're nurtured. And in that scenario, a daughter-in-law can be especially threatening to that emotional bond.
Caroline, what effect do you think the dynamic between mother and son ultimately had on your marriage?
That was the first crack. That was the first crack because we knew when they were coming out, you know, they planned the trip, and I would, for weeks leading up to it, I would say, can you please just ask them to, you know, help me out? And it was the false promises. Of course I will, I've got you back. They would arrive, and it was if I was just, you know, this outcast.
Louise's parents entirely happy with us as a couple? Probably not. Are my parents entirely happy? Probably not. But we've been married 6 years and we're going well. Louise's parents were meant to live with us for a period of 6 months just to help out with the newborn, but it's 6 years now. It does feel like it's been forever. The challenges with living with the in-laws are generally how the kids are raised. You do come across a fair bit of conflict and the parenting lines get a bit blurred. Louise's mum likes the good side of looking after the kids, spoiling them, treating them, giving them what they want, playing with the kids. Louise's mum was never keen on changing nappies. I don't know why. I guess she doesn't like doing the dirtier side of things when it comes to kids. We've given Louise's parents the master bedroom with an ensuite. We've given them a lot of space, and that is us respecting them. The expectations are for them to help us as much as they can because they have taken a fair share of the property. I'm not comfortable raising concerns with my in-laws, and I feel if I do, they might view it as me disrespecting them. With Louise's mum not being able to speak English, we don't speak at all. What often happens is Louise and her parents talk to each other. And I often am ignored. My fear with me being ignored in the dining table is sometimes with Louise and me as a married couple, we don't look after each other as much as we should. Louise is often distracted with her parents. So sometimes I don't get all the attention that I may want or that I may deserve. It does impact our marriage to an extent. Louise's dad is very opinionated. He feels the house has to be in a particular way. As much as we have open discussions, we argue about everything. One argument we had was about the wall clock that we bought for our house and as to where it should be positioned on the wall. I found the center point and I felt that the clock should be there, but Louise's dad thought the center point was 20 centimeters to the left. I've never lost it at Louise's dad, but at that point I said, do you not understand what the center is? My relationship with my in-laws, I wouldn't say it's great. It's progressing well. I have no issues with Louise's parents living with us in the long term, but I'd like to know if they are.
Lilith, did you expect to be living with your in-laws when you married Louise?
Absolutely not. And there are no signs of where this might lead us to, if it's a permanent bit or if it's just temporary.
Your parents are Sri Lankan, Louise is a Chinese. How did your in-laws feel about you marrying Louise?
Probably not very positive. With me marrying Louise, my parents weren't in agreement because generally in our culture you marry from the same caste or you marry from the same religion. But I did go outside that and I did marry Louise. So my parents aren't entirely happy, and the same with Louise's parents. You know, she's from a very strong cultural background as well, from a Shanghainese background, where they often do marry within the same culture. So we're from two different cultures that are very strongly opinionated, I'd say.
Louise, how did Lalith's parents feel about your marriage?
I don't really know how his parents actually feel about our marriage. I mean, now I think his parents are slowly accepting the fact that he's now gotten married to someone outside of their caste. But initially, I think his parents are very cultural, and in Sri Lanka, they basically have to do an astrology to, determine if the two people are compatible. And, when his parents asked for my astrology, which included, I think, the, date of birth and the time, I didn't feel comfortable giving it because I don't believe in the whole astrology thing to ensure that you are compatible before you get married.
Did they ever express their disapproval to you?
No, they haven't really expressed their disapproval to me, and partly I think because they don't really speak much English as well. So, when I met his parents, we didn't really have much of a conversation.
Louise and Lalith, has this conflict over family expectations caused tension between the two of you?
I think it has, yeah. I think
certainly has.
Yeah. I think there are certain aspects, of how we perceive things that can cause tension. But, I guess we try our best to kind of stick it together, I guess.
So as a couple, we're quite fine because most of our issues evolve around Louise's parents living with us or my parents not respecting her as much as she would like to.
What are the main tensions that come with living with your wife's parents?
I'd say it's about raising our kids primarily. The parenting lines are very blurred. Because they are in our space, we get judged a lot. We get a lot of advice. They're very critical of anything. I like a routine-based approach. They don't. So I'd like our boys to get up quite early to drop them off at childcare, for instance, but their theory is, let them get up at whatever time, but then I try and tell them, but it's us who's raising them. So if anything goes bad, we're responsible for that, not yourself. So I always say they like the good side of looking after the kids, not necessarily the challenges.
Your own parents live in Sri Lanka. Are there some positives to living with your parents-in-law?
There are. The biggest positive is I can have a drink with Louise's dad. I could never have a drink with my dad, for instance. Alcohol is not it's a taboo, I'd say. But I look up to Louise's dad as a father figure, to be honest. As many challenges as we have, we have dinner together. He sits right next to me. We can talk about anything. And he's extremely comfortable with me where he is critical of me. As bad as that sounds, it always takes a lot for someone to freely voice their concerns about you, I think. So that's, as bad as it is, that's a good thing.
And how about the language barrier? Is that a challenge in your relationship with them?
It is, because I can't communicate with Louise's mum, so I'll never truly know what she thinks of me as a person or as a father to our kids. And she's never spoken a word in our 6 years of living with them. But again, body language says a lot. And I can see, Louise and her parents raise their voices in Shanghainese, so I know something's not right. You don't know what it's about. And that's comforting in a way, because if you know there's an issue, then you get quite anxious and concerned yourself.
Louise, do you ever explain to Lalith what a discussion's been about?
Yeah, sometimes I do explain to him what it's about. Like, my mum is usually critical of me. Growing up, she's always been quite critical of me. But, you know, and I do get into arguments with my mum sometimes, but that's because that's how she is towards me growing up. And, you know, I do sometimes vent out to Lalith as well, saying, oh, my parents said this, you know. So I do vent to him sometimes.
Lalith, does Louise stand up for you when there is conflict?
Unfortunately not. It's a hard place to be in because if you have to pick between your parents and your husband, it's often a hard place to be in. She's not keen on diffusing the situation, but she likes to stay neutral, which doesn't help the situation. It makes it worse. But yeah.
Caroline, was this an issue with you in your marriage, not being stood up for?
Absolutely. I didn't feel supported at all. And a similar situation where I felt like I was a bit stuck between a rock and a hard place, because in that, you know, culture, his parents were very old school. It was, you know, you respect the parents. I remember there was one time that I did bring an issue to the table. It didn't go down very well. So I think that after that one experience, I didn't feel comfortable raising. So I left it to him. So I would secretly say, look, this has arisen. Can you have the conversation? But he never would. So there was no trust. They didn't feel safe or protected in the relationship at all.
Lalith, how do you manage those blurred lines you mentioned when it comes to parenting your kids?
It is challenging because you've got to ensure that you don't raise concerns, because concerns are often seen as disrespecting the parents or the in-laws. We try and talk it out. We try and talk in detail.
Marcus, did your relationship with your parents-in-law change once your 4 kids came along?
I think so. I don't actually think I've said this very often, but we actually have had 4 home births in 4 different homes, and Jill has been at the birth of every child.
Jill, did you feel like the relationship changed with Marcus, for example, when children came along?
Yes, I think so, yes. So initially, I guess he was our daughter's husband, and that was where he sat. But then when he became the father of our grandchildren, it was quite an emotional, strongly emotional reconnection, I think. But you don't want to tell your children how to raise their children. And we are there just as supporters of what they're doing. Whether we agree with what they're doing or not is immaterial. We're giving them the freedom to walk their own journey as parents. So as an in-law, it did change, but in a good way.
Jo, 10 years ago, you were looking forward to the arrival of your first grandchild. What was going on in your life at the time?
It was 3 years after I'd had a major stroke during brain surgery. And I had been medically retired from my career in the public service. I knew that my brain was different and that sometimes it didn't any longer connect with my mouth, and it still doesn't. At that time, my second eldest son became my carer, and he's now married to my daughter-in-law. I was incredibly excited about becoming Nanny Jo, and so grateful that because I was retired, I had all this time that I would be able to devote to loving my grandchildren.
And what was your relationship like with your son and daughter-in-law at the time?
We got along well. Yeah, we used to cook meals together, eat together.
Your relationship with your daughter-in-law changed when she was pregnant. Do you remember what happened then?
I wanted to spend money on my unborn grandchild, so I would send my daughter-in-law text messages every few days to ask what preferences she would like. I would look at baby stuff, obviously, and see some cot sheets, for example, and I would ask her, what colour would you like these in? And then one day she came around to my place and said that she feels smothered. that I needn't think I'm having anything to do with this child when I can't do anything for my own children.
Do you think you overstepped some boundaries of your daughter-in-law for her to say that?
I'm not sure that I ever really knew what her boundaries were. I certainly know what they are now. A few weeks after my granddaughter was born, 2 years after my grandson, I prepared a baby bundle, sent my son a text to say that I was bringing it around. When I arrived, my daughter-in-law told me never to ever come around unannounced again. I thought that I had made the announcement by texting my son to say that I was coming. It was very soon after that that they blocked me.
Was your relationship with your son close prior to this?
Yes, yeah. 6 years before I had surgery, my son had surgery. And so I, being his mother, I stayed in hospital with him for the whole time that he was there next to his bed, looked after him when he came out of hospital. And then when I had my brain surgery, he became my carer. And we were incredibly close.
Where does the breakdown in this relationship leave you now?
Very sad. Incredibly sad. I don't want my children to live with regret when I die, that they could have allowed their children to have a relationship with their loving grandmother. My grandchildren are being denied my love. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes that we regret when we become aware of them. Obviously, there was something that I did, but I don't know what that was, so I've never been able to apologise.
Jo, how do you feel about the estrangement from your grandchildren?
It's heartbreaking. They don't know Nanny Jo.
Have you ever met them?
When they were babies. They're my grandchildren. I just want them to know that I love them so much. We live in a throwaway society. But when did parents and grandparents become disposable?
Me and my mum have always been pretty close because we have lived together our whole lives. It was always just us, and since Andrew and my mum have got married, it's the first time I felt part of like a bigger family.
Wedding was a beautiful mashup of two cultures, two religions and two families coming together, and we had a lot of celebrations, and it was all quite new for Andrew and Andrew's family and his friends.
My favourite ceremony was the Hindu temple wedding. It was very bright and colourful, and it was such an uplifting atmosphere.
Amanda gave a wonderful speech at the wedding.
I don't have any grandchildren, but it's a blessing to welcome Alicia into the Zaab family.
She added a bit about me, and I felt very welcomed and adored by her in that moment.
I just want to let you know that you are a very special child and you will always be loved.
That was actually the moment I thought about the fact that I was becoming a grandchild to like another grandparent.
It's wonderful to have my first grandchild. I've waited quite a while. It makes our family complete. My life's changed for the better.
I love you, Mum. I would describe our family life now as chaotic but loving. Moving in with Andrew's family has been lovely. It's been great to be welcomed and great to call us all a family.
In my previous marriage, I did not get any support from my in-laws. Life has changed drastically. It's the immense support that I've got from family, which I thoroughly missed as my parents are overseas. That love, care and cherishment are the things that we want to be around them.
Rena, your parents live in India. Is Andrew's family's support here in Australia important to you?
It is very important to me to have such beautiful, loving, incredible in-laws that I've been blessed with. From me and my daughter, we have grown to a big family now. And as Alicia, my daughter, mentioned, that it is so great to be called a grandchild of this beautiful, loving family. I don't have to think twice about leaving Alicia when we're going out for date nights or driving up to Sydney or Melbourne or traveling anywhere. And, you know, basically we go for family walks with our dog, and she's incredible at, my mother-in-law Amanda is incredible at managing that as well. And she loves pets. And recently she has been helping Alicia with her driving lessons. So she's like, okay, I'm going to assist her, and she would lend her car and sit next to her to drive as well. And Alicia has been choosing universities for her career path, and my mother-in-law's support has been incredible in that as well. So it's more of a spiritual, mental, emotional support that we get. And proximity is very, very important for me, and that family love and bonding that we have been doing, it's amazing.
Andrew, you have new in-laws too, Rena's parents. What's that like for you?
One of the major things I did notice is how welcoming they are into the family, how well they treat me. It's nearly like being a superstar, walking into the house, offering me drinks, telling me to come in, sit down, and the hospitality that's provided to the son-in-law. That was probably the major thing that I wasn't quite ready for or quite expecting. It kind of caught me off guard a little bit. And being accepting of that and not being offensive by just running with it, basically, is kind of how it went.
Is it important to you to have a good relationship with your in-laws?
Yeah, I think it's very important. So I'm quite happy and quite thankful that we don't have any of those issues in our relationships.
Marcus, is having a harmonious relationship with your in-laws an important part of your life?
Absolutely. I think if it impacts so many parts of your life. We had Jill's birthday, we've got Christmases, Easters, holidays, a significant child milestone, so many areas of life that most people would love to include their entire family, in-laws included. You want them to be moments that are unforgettable for all the right reasons. So I think when you've got a great harmonious relationship with your in-laws, you can go into all of those milestones with a celebratory intent and not a hope that everything goes okay or that no one fights. You're actually genuinely looking forward to these significant milestones in life.
Joe, are you hopeful you can restore your relationship with your son and your daughter-in-law?
Constantly live in hope. Yeah, my door's always open, always. My telephone number's the same. They know where I live.
Candice, can we be too harsh on ourselves if things don't work out with our extended family?
I think we can be harsh on ourselves, yeah. One of the ways to think about these relationships is that it is completely possible for beauty and harmony to exist, and I think some people have shared stories that really point to that. But there also can be underlying tensions, and it's important to normalise that tension as well. Because of these kinds of issues, it's sensible to think about these relationships as one that may just take work, and it's okay for them to take work, but they're probably not going to be perfect automatically. One last thing to keep in mind is that, you know, blood ties really matter here, and people are often very preoccupied with their own well-being and the well-being of their biological children and grandchildren. And for some families, an in-law dynamic is just never going to reach the same level of intimacy as a biological relationship. That's okay. There can still be harmony there. It may just take some work to have that.
Caroline, when you separated from your husband 15 months ago, did you both acknowledge that tension with the in-laws was a factor?
Yeah, absolutely. He wrote to his mum. I was actually looking at the email today. He wrote to his mum last October and pointed that out. So I think whether he wanted to acknowledge it or whether he did it for me, to say, look, I'm trying to show you some level of support. I'm not quite sure how authentic him reaching out to his mum and saying, you've got a heart to play, was more that, see, I'm trying to, you know, correct this for me, rather than actually him wanting to do it for himself.
How is your relationship with your in-laws now?
I don't really hear from them. And it does sadden me when I hear, you know, of these beautiful grandparent relationships, because my fourth son said to me the day, like, I don't even know my grandparents, I don't know them. And I didn't experience that either. So my children haven't experienced, so it does worry me in some sense as to what do they see as a really healthy family dynamic.
You have 4 sons. Chances are you will be a mother-in-law one day. Have you reflected on that?
I have reflected a lot, and I think, you know, if I have to be brutally honest, I thought there was a daughter in one of those 4, because the amount of people that said to me walking down the street with these 4 children, these 4 boys, was a son's a son until he meets a wife and a daughter's a daughter for the rest of her life, that sort of old wives' tale. And that really struck a chord with me, because I had a great relationship with my mum, but didn't have a great relationship with my dad's mum. But I truly believe that is an old wives' tale. I think it's the core foundation of the relationship that you create with your sons. And I would say what I've learned from this entire experience is to welcome these beautiful girls that are going to come into my life.
Candice, is there any evidence to show that grandchildren are more connected to their mother's parents over their father's parents?
Look, there is. The maternal grandmother is the one who is usually the youngest, and she's therefore able to invest more. And she also tends to take much more of an interest in the grandchildren. Part of the reason for this, surprisingly, is actually genetic. So the maternal grandmother is the one who has the most certainty that those grandchildren are biologically hers. And that's because she's related to them through 2 women, both herself and her daughter. And whenever you find that you have a relative that you're related to through a man, there can always be a question of whether that man is really the father of those children. Now, that question doesn't need to be rational. It doesn't need to be conscious. There doesn't even need to be any evidence for it. But when these kinds of concerns play out in the background, one of the things we can find is it can create emotional distance between relatives.
Lilith, if Louisa's parents continue to live with you, how do you think that will pan out?
As challenging as it is, I must admit we're quite fortunate to have Louisa's parents living with us. I never grew up with my grandparents. Louise never grew up with her grandparents. That could be the reason why we end up in conflicts, because I don't know what that experience is like, so we're extremely fortunate. In the longer term, my only concern is Louisa's parents themselves don't know if they like living with us. As much as we have challenges, I don't think we've really asked them. You know, do you like living with us? We assume they do, and they help out with the kids. But if they do live with us in the longer term, it might have an impact on our relationship if it continues the current course, which is we don't discuss concerns. We have overarching opinions on how to raise the kids. I think as many tensions as we do have, you know, it's important to clear that out. If this is going to be a long-term arrangement where Louise's parents do live with us now, we come from the same cultures, which is where we have to look after our parents. And Louise is the only child. So I know that we do have to look after them, but how that looks like, I don't know.
Louise, what are your thoughts on this?
I know that my parents are wanting to stay with us long term, and that's because they, as much as they love spending time with the grandkids, I think they also like their own privacy. And, you know, they definitely don't like Melbourne as much as Sydney. So for my parents, they would choose to come back to Sydney in a heartbeat. When our oldest goes to school, my parents will come back to Sydney and probably come to Melbourne every 6 months or so just to spend a few weeks with them.
Jake and Luciano, given some of the real difficulties you've heard in the room tonight, do you feel like you've both hit the jackpot in terms of families and marrying into other families?
I think so, yeah. I feel like we knew though, like it is the alchemy of relationships is so difficult to predict. And so I think we've always kind of been really grateful openly to our in-laws as well.
And also we don't have a lot of, let's say, constraint from what society can expect from us, because it's all like a blank canvas generally for, you know, a gay couple in terms of the relationship with the parents, the relationship with the in-laws.
Thank you so much. It's been such a fascinating and very open and honest discussion. Thank you too for joining us. See you next week.